Good morning. It's really good to be here. And my offering is going to visit these coordinates at reasonably high velocity. A little experiential scar tissue, by which I mean mostly my mistakes. And then at very high speed, a worked example of a lifeline. Not because I'm self-centered. In fact, I'm an INTJ off the scale I, so today is quite daunting for me. But really as an invitation for you to think about your own lifeline. Who are the seminal influences on your life that's brought to where you are and will take you to where you'll be? And then I'm going to introduce a letter that I'm writing. It's called Dear Me, and it's a letter to myself that I'm in the process of writing now, age 61, to my 24-year-old self. All the lessons that most of my mistakes have taught me that I wish I'd known and had the wisdom to accept age 24. Again, in the spirit of sharing experiential scar tissue. Because when looking around the room, we're at very different points of the arc of our lives. In terms of working lives, some towards the end, and looking around the room, you're all at the beginning. And then a few reflections, and then some desert island reading, which is a low-carbon contribution of some of the books that have influenced me. And I'll make sure, Anne-Marie, that we complete the session in the right time. As Anne-Marie's mentioned, I've had the privilege of working for nearly 40 years in the NHS, 27 as a chief exec. It's the best job in the world. And that's not to say there aren't dark moments as well as light, but the privilege, as each of us have, of working with fabulous colleagues, helping individuals, their loved ones, through some of the most joyous and sometimes through the saddest times of their lives, is a true privilege. And I've been involved in various working parties, including the Robert Francis work on mid-staffs. And what life has taught me is we live life forwards and understand it backwards. So, Nottingham University Hospital is where I've just left. For those of you who've seen the hospital programme, I was in part responsible for agreeing along with the board that we should do that. I then left, and my fantastic successor, Tracy, and then ended up having to pick up the mantle of chief exec, and within a few weeks of rocking up and being chief exec, found herself on national TV. I think I'm off Tracy's Christmas card list, but what's been very interesting is that job applications in Nottingham have gone through the roof. And that was one of the reasons why we did it. We also thought that we should be, we tried to discharge this responsibility, leaders in openness. But punctuate my remarks with a few quotations to help make sure that none of you visit the land of Morpheus first thing in the morning. And the well-known philosopher Buffalo Springfield said, there's something happening here, what it is ain't exactly clear, which is precisely what we feel during turbulent times. And then, very briefly, this is my intake of the National Management Training Scheme. It was called the National Administrative Training Scheme in those days. September in Bayswater, 1981. The ugliest individual is him. That's me, sporting a rather pretentious goatee beard. And he turned into that. And then importance never comes with situations we attach it. You may well have important conversations today, the significance of which may only become apparent in the years ahead. I describe these as cubic centimetres of chance, which we'll revisit subsequently. And I'm not going to go into detail, and I appreciate for those from the mid onwards, it's actually been quite difficult. What I did, just as I retired, I'm a very reflective soul, is assemble the lifeline, i.e. those events and people that have actually contributed significantly to what I ended up doing. Because originally I wanted to be a pilot. But unfortunately, I'm blind in one eye and through German measles, so I didn't really qualify. And I'm so grateful I didn't. But at the time when I was a teenager, when that was my obsession, it was a huge crushing defeat. But actually, it was a springboard in doing lots of other things. So I would really recommend best over, if it's your tipple, a bottle of red wine or two with your partner, and to map out your lifeline to where you are, and then perhaps to speculate the next 10, 15 years. In life, there are many gifts. If we're lucky, good health. If we're fortunate, loving relationships, and great teachers. And I know in this room already there are great teachers. And the gift of enabling others to do great things is hugely, hugely important and valuable, and I've benefited from that. And certainly there are a number of great teachers in my lifeline, but I won't go into to those in detail for reasons of time. And the most important things in life aren't things. In my submission, they're relationships, including those that we create at work. Because life is too short not to work in a joyful environment, even though it often means it's very, very challenging. So this is the letter from me, from the vantage point, age 61, to a very inexperienced 24-year-old, which was the age I joined the NHS, or thereabouts. And I'd spent 3 years as a self-employed picture framer, paint and decorator, and non-HGV driver, which, as you can see, is the ideal set of credentials to become a chief executive of a hospital or a trust. And I had that portfolio career in order to enable me to go rock climbing, which was something I did, and then I embarked upon the career that I currently have. And I won't go into each of these. What I will say, most of these are the product of very tough times. The Norwegians are very wise. They have lots of sage sayings. And one of them is, no one needs a good captain in calm seas. And in your respect, you'll be the captain for a number of colleagues. So the value of values, being clear what you stand for and not allowing them to be compromised. And each of us have tests. I know that I have, in terms of whether one will treat them as plastic and malleable. For my submission, that's a very, very dangerous place to be. But being clear about values and using those as, if you like, a satellite navigation system to guide your way through the various challenges that you face. The other is, and again, there's an act of unburdening here, is we are more constrained by ourselves than we are others. If we say we can't do something, we won't. If we believe we can, the probability is we'll be successful. And we communicate that to others. I've had lots of fabulous bosses. I have one or two who have been dreadful, but I've had lots of fabulous bosses. And Dame Deirdre Hine is one of the smartest women I've ever met in my life. Chief Medical Officer in Wales and Chairman of the Commission for Health Improvement, where I was the Chief Exec. And Deirdre said to me at one stage, when we were going through a particularly turbulent time, Peter, you should regard work as a lifelong seminar. I rather like that notion, where work is a learning laboratory. It helps to, particularly when one gets into quite difficult territory, to slightly detach oneself from the heat and burden to work, well, what am I learning here, including about myself, and how can I be more effective? The other is, which I'll move on to quickly, is always select who you work for far more carefully than they select you. Seriously. I've made 2 mistakes in my career, both of which I should have predicted and didn't. And they were pretty uncomfortable. You're entrusting your energy, your purpose to individuals, to organisation, make sure it fits. And then W.H. Auden, rather a serious author. We are here on earth to do good to others. What the others are here for, I don't know. A rather more humorous offering from Auden than one's accustomed to. And then a few other reflections. The constancy of purpose, constancy of leadership. And each of you are leaders. And one of the most important qualities that, as leaders, we are naturally obliged, both by role and by duty and personality, to demonstrate is trust. people have to be able to trust you, and you have to be able to trust others. And you can't generate trust like instant coffee. Normally, in my experience, it's formed over a period of time, particularly in adversity, and how well we look after each other during that time. So, and making sure that whilst individuals may change, the values and behaviours are constant. And there are some fantastic examples of organisations in this room of inspirational leadership and change over time because of the constant application of values and behaviours. And the other piece of advice which I've learnt is always appoint people more able than yourself and make them fly. A measure of a leader is who follows them. And then look after the individuals for the arc of their working life and maybe beyond. Looking after people isn't just for Christmas. And some of the best people I've worked with and for have taken interest in me and those of my peers throughout our lives. The other is Stephen Covey. I confess in my reading I'm a bit West Coast. I'm an economist by training, which is rather East Coast, but I do like to visit the West Coast on occasion. And Stephen Covey made the observation, we should seek to understand before seeking to be understood. And certainly as a chief exec, I learnt, again, mostly from my mistakes, the value of going to see and talk to people as opposed to relying exclusively on written synthetic reports. A series of cock-ups I've been responsible for by not applying that lesson. So I offer that to you in the spirit of collegiate friendship. And then Wilkins, inexperience often triumphs over experience because it doesn't know where to fail. And I'm really looking forward to learning of Guy's session. Some of the most radical improvement I've been associated with, mostly supported rather than led, has been through the radical application of something outside of health into health by people who aren't that experienced in health. As a friend of mine, actually a consultant neurologist who's now retired, who during lunch break got his spectacles changed to Vision Express in an hour. He came back and said, Peter, why can't we offer a single visit outpatient neurology clinic in a couple of hours rather than have people return 3 or 4 times for routine tests before we give them the diagnosis if we're able to. And he changed that, and within 6 weeks it happened. It was a single visit as opposed to multiple visits, which led to quite a lot of work in Leicester at the time. The other is, one has to be careful how one applies this. Avoid short-term answers to long-term questions. And that's not to say that tactically one doesn't on occasion need to tactically intervene on a short-term basis. But unless one gets to grips with the underlying cause and address those, often which are cultural, then the risk is that the problem reasserts itself again. So sometimes one has to offer 2 parallel courses of action as a leader. One is to deal with the immediate, to satisfy the immediate requirement, but in parallel, make sure that there's a lot of work to solve the underlying problem. And if I may, and particularly as we become more fluent in place-based care and more substantial change across systems, is there's real magic in bold, audacious goals in pursuit of serving others. The single visit neurology clinic I mentioned briefly, it improved the service in terms of time, in terms of resource, literally by hundreds of %. And if we'd got into that exercise saying, well, let's change by 3 or 4%, we would have simply slightly improved the existing process. So there's real magic in going for really bold solutions. And finally, authenticity. You can't fake it. People have stories about you, and they're built up on the little vignettes of everyday contact they have with you. And some of you will have names, most I'm sure are very polite, which again will be derived from the everyday activities that you are seen to do, and mostly you'll not be aware that you're being observed. But as leaders, one is always on show. And this is something we had in Nottingham University Hospitals on our intranet every morning. I don't want any yes men, women around me. I want everyone to tell me the truth, even if it costs them their jobs. And then as a leader, visit the Gemba, which is a Japanese phrase meaning where value is created. So it could be that you might go and visit a clinic, an operating theatre, and similarly you might invite others into your domain. I had the practice of an induction, inviting anybody who wanted to find out what a chief exec do to contact me, but the only request was that I then reciprocated and spent time with them in the workplace. And I had some fantastic experience, including with junior doctors, with cleaners, with porters. But visit the Gemba and invite others to join you. And the other is when something goes wrong, and I've been responsible for quite a few cock-ups in my time. A helpful frame of reference, which I learnt, is always make sure the learning from what goes wrong, the impact of the learning from what goes wrong, is far, far greater than the impact of what went wrong. It's really helpful and important, and it discharges our obligation to patients, their loved ones, and staff in a more fulsome way than if one exclusively solves on solving the immediate problem. And then also, if you're in a meeting and the chair looks at you, if there's a big problem, and the chair looks at you, "Sir, what are we going to do about solving the problem?" Now, my advice in these situations is maintain eye contact. It's very, very important with the chair. Very important. And then say, "Chair, we need to manage today as a necessary past condition of the future we want to create." And if you feel theatrical, hit the table. And this will give you 30 seconds to work out what on earth you're going to do. And there's a serious message there. And again, I've been responsible for quite a few cock-ups in my time. But when we do that, when one has been charged with solving a problem, not only making sure the impact of the learning is greater than the impact of what went wrong, but actually take yourself into the future. And then look back on today and work out, well, how do we want to be seen in 2-3 years' time or 2-3 months' time as reflecting on how we've managed this particular challenge and so on and so forth. Cubic centimetres of charge, which I briefly mentioned before. It's a fantastic article in the British Journal of Geriatrics by Yosef, who's a general porter now working in Barts, called the All-Seeing Porter. And what Yosef describes is the daily interactions and enrichments that he seeks to put into place for those he works with, patients and staff and loved ones and so on and so forth. And we each have them. If you harvest those well, during the course of your working and non-working life, you'll change the world more than you'll ever realise. And you'll have abundant opportunities during the course of today as well. Wilkins, people who think they won't achieve much rarely do. People who think they will achieve much rarely don't. But the Times, back in 1834, and this is We Live Life Forwards, Understand It Backwards, made the observation that the stethoscope will ever come into general use, notwithstanding its value, is extremely doubtful, because its beneficial application requires much time and gives a good deal of trouble both to the patient and practitioner. Its hue and character are foreign and opposed to all our habits and associations. And I think this is part of turbulent times. As I confess, there have been times in my career where I haven't known what to do. And sometimes that can be really intimidating and frightening, especially if one's responsible, as each of you are, for others. And the notion that William James describes as the greatest discovery of my generation is that a human being can alter their life by altering their attitudes of mind. Easy to describe, tough to do, but very rewarding when one's able to. And then my desert island reading list. Low carbon. Many of these available on Kindle. I'm not on commission. And there are two or three I'd like to draw your attention to. Joseph Jaworski, an American author, describes his leadership journey as a story of his life. You may find some resonance in that, and it includes some extraordinary examples of synchronicity, which, as you'll know, means something that's highly improbable and highly significant. The other is Matthew Said, Black Box Thinking, for those of us who haven't read it. It's fantastic. It includes a very poignant introductory section describing Martin Bromley's wife, Martin being a pilot who lives actually around here, whose wife died as a result of a very straightforward ENT procedure. And what Martin did extraordinarily, notwithstanding the grief associated with the loss of his wife, is he then helped to support the clinical team responsible for this difficulty, work through a human factors analysis in exactly the manner that would happen in the aviation industry. And Martin now is leading, with a number of others, human factors developments within the NHS. And the other is Rose McGinty, Electric Souk. Rose is an NHS manager, works in London, lives in Kent, and is fantastic. Really interesting story, which draws on her experience working in the Middle East. And the final one, which isn't on here, which a friend of mine has just introduced me to, is The Trusted Executive by John Blakely. Deconstructing the properties of trust and how we as leaders either generate it or don't, as the case may be. So that's my offering. I hope there's some interest in those. And in my sort of concluding remarks, if I might say a thank you to a number of individuals, and I can't be comprehensive in my offering, with Anne-Marie for somehow spanning Olympian-like across a huge territory. And Anne-Marie has the rare gift of enabling greatness to flourish, not only within herself, but others. And, of course, Christina, who's returned from Italy, especially to join us, flew in yesterday evening in order to be with us. And, again, a lady who elicits greatness. And thank you for taking on this huge territory. and, of course, others who've helped to organise today, including Vicky and Julia. And at that point, ladies and gentlemen, if I may presume friends, can I wish you well in your journey? It undoubtedly will be tumultuous. I hope it will be rewarding and fulfilling. And what you can be assured, you're in great company. Thank you very much.